Tom made his final payment on a Thursday afternoon, $34,000 across 3 accounts, 4 years of every financial decision filtered through one question, paid in full at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Thursday in November. He had imagined this moment more times than he could count. He had described it to people as the finish line, the moment everything would change, the weight would lift, the clarity would arrive. He sat at his desk after hitting confirm and waited for the feeling he had been working toward for 4 years. It did not come, not the way he expected. What came instead was quieter and stranger, a kind of flatness, a sudden absence of the structure that had organized every month of his adult life. He had been so focused on getting here that he had never thought seriously about what here actually was. Most people who spend years paying down debt describe the same thing Tom felt on that Thursday. They expect relief. They get something more complicated, and understanding why requires understanding what debt actually does to a person beyond the monthly payment. Debt is not only a financial condition. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019 studied what happened to people after debt was eliminated and found something that had nothing to do with their bank statements. Each debt account that was paid off improved cognitive functioning by approximately 1/4 of a standard deviation and reduced the likelihood of anxiety by 11% and present bias by 10%. The researchers described what chronic debt does as a bandwidth tax. The mental weight of owing money, tracking balances, worrying about interest, calculating what is left, occupies cognitive space continuously, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly in the background, running like a program you cannot close. When the debt disappears, the bandwidth comes back, and most people do not realize how much of it they had lost until they suddenly have it again. Tom had been carrying $22,000 in credit card debt and $12,000 in a personal loan for the 4 years he spent paying it down. The combined minimum payments were $640 a month, but the financial cost was not the only cost, and arguably not the most significant one. He was making decisions every month under a cognitive load he had normalized. He was planning, working, relating to people, evaluating opportunities through a mental framework that was quietly compressed by the constant background calculation of debt. He thought he was thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly for someone running a continuous financial stress program in the background of every single day. The first thing Tom noticed after paying off the debt was not what he expected to notice. He started finishing things. Projects he had started and left at 80% for months suddenly got completed. He started making phone calls he had been putting off. He booked a dentist appointment he had delayed for 11 months. Small decisions that had felt vaguely effortful suddenly felt easy. He could not explain why. He had more money now because he was no longer paying down debt. But the changes that were happening were not happening because of money. They were happening because cognitive bandwidth had returned to a brain that had been operating under capacity for years. The second change surprised him more. He did not know who he was without the debt. This sounds abstract until you live it. For 4 years, Tom's financial identity had been organized around one goal. Every sacrifice, every decision, every month that ended with a slightly lower balance was a form of progress he could measure and feel. He was the person paying off his debt. That was a role with clear metrics and a clear narrative. When the debt was gone, the role was gone with it. And the question that moved into the space where the role had been was one he had not prepared for. What am I optimizing for now? Research on identity and goal completion consistently shows that people who achieve major long-term goals often experience a disorientation period afterward that looks from the outside like a plateau or even a regression. It is sometimes called the arrival fallacy, the belief that reaching a goal will produce a sustained emotional state that the goal does not actually produce. Tom had expected arrival to feel like arrival. It felt more like standing in an empty room after moving out of a house he had lived in for 4 years. The debt was gone, so was the structure it had imposed. The third change was about anxiety. Tom had expected that paying off the debt would eliminate the financial anxiety that had followed him for 4 years. It did not eliminate it. It redirected it. For 4 years, his anxiety had had an object. There was a number and a plan and a clear connection between his actions and his progress. After the debt was gone, the anxiety was still present, but it had no object. He was anxious about not being anxious enough. He was worried about whether he was doing the right things with money now that he had options. He was uncertain in a new way, the way you are uncertain when there is no map, as opposed to the old way, when there was a map but the terrain was difficult. This is one of the most documented patterns in post-debt psychology. People who spend years in financial survival mode, where every decision is constrained and the goal is clear, often find that financial freedom, the absence of that constraint, produces a form of anxiety that is harder to manage than the original one. Constraint is uncomfortable, but it is legible. Freedom requires you to choose, and choosing requires clarity about what you actually want, which is a question that the debt had been postponing for years. The fourth change happened in Tom's relationships. During the 4 years of paying down debt, certain social dynamics had been fixed in place by his financial situation. He did not attend expensive events. He bought cheaper options. He declined things that cost money he did not have. His friends had adjusted their expectations of him around his financial situation. When the situation changed, the expectations did not immediately change with it. Some of his friendships had been calibrated to a version of him that no longer existed. Rebuilding those dynamics, or realizing that some of them could not be rebuilt, was a social consequence of the financial change that nobody had told him to prepare for. Now the fair defense, because debt is not purely a destructive force, and the experience of paying it down is not purely a loss. 4 years of paying down debt built something in Tom that a person who had never been in debt could not have built the same way. It built genuine evidence that he could sustain a difficult commitment through discomfort, through setbacks, through months when the progress felt invisible. That is not a trivial thing. Most people never get evidence of that kind of sustained capacity because they never have to test it at that scale for that long. Tom came out of the experience knowing something concrete about himself that many people with clean financial histories never have to find out. Debt also teaches a precision about money that comfort does not teach. When every dollar is allocated before it arrives, when the margin between enough and not enough is narrow, you develop an attention to financial detail that people who have always had space in their budgets do not develop the same way. That precision does not disappear when the debt does. It becomes a skill that works differently in an environment of abundance than it did in an environment of scarcity, but it is still a skill. The real trap in paying off debt is not the debt itself. It is the assumption that the goal of being debt-free is the same thing as having a financial life. It is not. Being debt-free is a starting line that looks like a finish line. The people who thrive after paying off debt are the ones who understand that the work they just completed was clearing the ground, not building the house. The people who struggle are the ones who spent 4 years focused on the number going to zero and never asked themselves what they would do when it got there. The question that matters is not how do I pay off my debt, it is what am I building the moment after the last payment clears, because that question determines whether the 4 years of discipline you just completed was preparation for something or just the end of something, and only one of those answers is worth 4 years of your life. If this video put a name on something you felt after reaching a financial milestone that was supposed to feel different than it did, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every week we break down the real psychology behind the financial decisions and transitions that shape how people live. And the next video is going to explore what happens to people who reach financial independence earlier than expected, and why the freedom they spent years building turns out to be the hardest thing they have ever had to learn to live with.